Okay, so one thing that I love about clay is that it's really fun and easy to create organic forms that are inspired by nature. And I just wanted to show you a technique of just making little roses. And I also made this sort of kind of columbine like flower from two different clay bodies. So I'm going to demonstrate really quickly on how to do both of these things. So we'll start with how to make a rose. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a dry surface to work on. I pulled out my canvas because creating roses on thin slabs is something that tends to stick to the surface that I'm working on. And so the canvas, because it absorbs moisture, is really great for using really thin slabs on and cutting away from and avoiding the attachment of your clay to your surface. So just to start, after I rolled it out, I actually lift up my slab a little bit just to make sure that it's not sticking to the surface. And the way that you make a rose is you're definitely going to need some sort of pokey tool. And it's really just sort of like a fun organic experience. I don't really think much about like the math of any of it or anything. So I like to start by making this wavy line. So this is going to be the inside of my rose and this is going to be the outside of my rose. So roses are always going to be smaller on the inside and their petals get bigger as it moves towards the outside. So I'm going to mirror that line that I created. And I'm just sort of tracing it out on the slabs. I'm not cutting away just yet. That looks fine to me. It's almost like a cloud, a puff of cloud of like a train smoke or something. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. And so this is going to be my rose. I just have to, first I'm gonna look at how thick this is. I definitely could have made this a little bit thinner to start. I think this is just looking a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch, but you know, a lot of working with the clay is just about kind of creating an illusion like any other art form. And so these petals need to definitely look thinner. So I'm just going to pinch the edges of this entire strip that I just cut from the slab. And I don't want it to dry out too much, so I'm just going to wet my fingers a bit. And I'm going to just go over the edges, pinch a little. You definitely want to keep the smaller part of this piece that I cut out to be wet because I'm going to roll that up after I'm done finessing and thinning out the edges of what are to be my rose petals. Let's go ahead and move this out of the way so you can really see. Just dipping my fingers in some water and running them along the edges, making sure to get rid of any of the clay that's gathering, just smooth it out. And then use my forefinger and my thumb to really pinch this and make it look thinner. So there, there's tearing that happens where this piece of, what do I call this? My cloud, funny train cloud shape gets thinner. If that breaks off, that's okay. And I'll show you why this might break off in just a second. One more double check to make sure that it's, oop, and it broke. Just double checking to make sure everything is feeling fairly thin and also wet enough, because now I'm gonna get some more water on my fingers. I'm gonna start to curl what is going to be the very inside of the rose by going to the smallest part of the shape. And I'm just gonna curl this towards me. And if this is supposed to be a petal, so this petal rips off, that's okay. Just gonna finesse it, make it look nice and smooth like a rose petal instead of lumpy and chunky like a weird piece of clay. And I'm gonna just continue wrapping. Grab what I've already started, and I'll go ahead and continue wrapping around the rose. And sometimes you can even rip this part off on purpose, because sometimes rose petals of roses that are a little bit more mature tend to kind of fall off and wilt a little bit more compared to the inside of the rose. A little more water on the fingers, just a little bit of water at a time, never making it too wet, never letting it get too dry. So this last little rose petal that I'm making, I'm gonna have placed right there. I think that's very beautiful. And so for the bottom is gonna be, there is potential danger of maybe creating some air holes here, but what I like to do with the bottoms of my roses is just really compress them and pinch off this meat here. Now that's just one nice little rose. And if your bottom isn't flat enough and you need to make it flat in order to maybe attach to your tiles or to attach to another piece in the future, you can just bang it down on the table and you'll have a nice flat bottom. All right, so the rose is done compared with my first rose. And making roses and multiples looks really nice together, especially when you play with the different sizes and different forms. And it really, once you kind of have those multiples, it really starts to feel natural and beautiful and organic. And then I created this, it's sort of like a jungle flower maybe, or it kind of reminded me of the Colorado State flower, which is a columbine. So I made this little bizarre flower. It has a lot of spunk. It's very funky, out of two different clays. So I have slip for this flower. I'm going to need slip and a paintbrush. And I also created this sort of mossy or hairy like texture with one of my carving tools, which is my strainer that I have, which is, I'll show you ways to attach all of this together. So First, we got to make the main 5 petals. That's pretty simple. I'm just going to draw petals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals into my slab of clay. I want them to be as close in size as possible, even though I know my slab isn't completely perfect all the way through. By perfect, I mean all one height. That's okay. So I'll cut the petals. Pop those out of the slab here. Now I'll just take my fingers with a little bit of water, and just like the rose, I will flatten and finesse the edges of this flower petal to look more like a flower petal and less like a strange chunk of clay. And there's some little moments of pulling with just 2 fingers as opposed to 2 hands. The thinner your flower petals appear to be, more of a realistic illusion of creating this flower will make, which is definitely true artistry. Probably should have pre-made these for the sake of saving time, your time. Okay, so there are 5 petals. Now I'm going to connect this and put them together in their flower arrangement. So the one thing that will make this really easy for you is to just make sure that you're overlapping where the petals are meeting on the inside just a little bit. So I'm just going to overlap this on here, press it down, finesse it together. Finesse is the word of the video. I'm going to press this down into that. Press this one down into here. press this one down into here. Okay. I'm gonna hold this in the middle, flip it over, finesse the back side as well so that these stay together, because there's just very like wet and limp and easy to break and easy to mold. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of hold this in my hand like so. Try to get them all to close with one another and give this another pinch down here. Pinching this clay together at the base so that they can actually like create a flower-like form instead of just being like 5 little petals that are flopping about and around. And as it dries, it'll make more sense. So hold that in my hand, just sort of open it up. Pinch off the petals so they kind of all have that same sort of finished look to it. And then I'm going to add my little fuzzy, what is that called? I think pestils is what's the term for the little things that grow in the middle of the flower. So I'm gonna make that. I'm just gonna set this down. And I have my strainer and I have my red clay. Oops, I like to try not to get my white clay into my red clay, although it's like not that big of a deal. You can always fix that up later. But anyways, I wiped off my hands a little bit because I'm going to handle some red clay. So I just grabbed a piece of red clay, stuck it in here, and now I'm going to use my thumb and just, it can be just sometimes just feels so hard to do, but then sometimes it's really easy. Well, first of all, I got to fix that. Okay, try again. The thumb wasn't working, so I'm just trying to just smash it up with my other fingers. Okay, there we go. That took a lot of strength that time for some reason. Okay, so that's enough coming off of my strainer here. About like I don't know, a 1/2 inch long. And I'm going to take my white petaled flower, grab some slip with a brush, and put a fairly thick amount of slip just right in the middle here. And then take my needle tool and I'm going to scrape and lift my little red clay fuzzies that go in the middle of my flower. And I'm just going to use my flower to kind of grab the fuzzies and I'm going to pull my needle tool out. So all those little pieces of clay should be attached by me scooping off of this with my needle tool and then scooping it into the flower. And I also can use my needle tool and just kind of compress that down a little bit more as well. But once that slip dries, that's going to be in there pretty well. And then I have my other slab for the other petals that go on the outside of the white petals. And that's, you know, that's fairly easy to conceptualize. You just want to make thin petals. I'll show you how to attach one really easily. Once again, finessing the edges, making the petals look as thin as possible by pinching the slab to be thinner on the outside. And And just like the rose, it's really easy. You can just attach and compress your thumb. And add 4 more red clay petals to your columbine or super tropical looking flower. So that's just a start. And I hope that, I mean, you can, make a flower any way that you want to, but I hope that at least this was inspiring for you.